What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And yes, having seen the title of this video, you may think I'm insane. Spider-Man 3 being your favorite Spider-Man film, are you crazy? Maybe I am, but just to give some context, after the release of No Way Home, I wanted to revisit the older Spider-Man films. I had already revisited the Andrew Garfield films before No Way Home, but I had not revisited the Tobey Maguire trilogy. So I rewatched all of them very recently, and to give you a recap of my thoughts on each of them, just on my most recent viewing, I thought the first one was pretty solid. It's a solid origin story and a fun watch, but it is extremely dated. And upon my rewatch of the second film, I honestly thought it was extremely overrated. I thought there were a lot of plot holes that I could pick out. I think Peter's overall arc is solid, and the train sequence still holds up pretty well, but it's not a great film. It's honestly pretty bad if you look at it objectively through a critical lens and taking your nostalgia goggles off. But when I got to Spider-Man 3, I was very nervous because this was always my favorite one growing up, and I decided to take off the nostalgia goggles, watch it as a film through a critical lens, and I still think it is the best Spider-Man film of all time. Now, hopefully, those of you who perhaps do not like this film will be able to get some newfound appreciation out of it after my review. So, let's get started. Now, right off the bat, I figured I might as well address some of the common criticisms I've seen for this film, and those are the amount of characters in it and the pacing. For the first one, yes, there are a lot of characters in it, particularly villains. You've got Harry Osborn stepping into the role of the Green Goblin. You have Sandman and Venom, and a lot of people think Venom is bad in this movie, but I think he works perfectly, and we'll get back to that later. And the pacing can definitely be off at certain points in this movie, particularly the battle at the end does kind of just come out of the blue, so to speak, but I feel like everything does work, and I can kind of ignore the pacing being a little bit shoddy at points in the movie because I think everything else works about it. I feel this film is overall the most morally complex and thematically rich Spider-Man film. Starting off, I just feel like the general kind of busyness of the movie, the amount of stuff going on, feels very true to Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man's life is meant to be like our lives, unpredictable. There's constantly stuff going on, and I feel like it kind of captures the feel of a comic book. I don't think comic books are ever meant to be these very streamlined kind of stories, and I feel like the chaoticness of the movie really does work to its advantage. I also feel like the performances are much more real in this one. That may be due to the fact that the previous two films were shot back-to-back, from my understanding, so some of the weaker actors, particularly Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, were able to really kind of improve and maybe take some acting classes, I'm not sure, but I think they're way better in this movie, and I feel like the drama is really lent a lot of realism to it through the performances. As I said, I think a lot of the actors got better, and I feel like a lot of the actors they brought in are very good and experienced, such as Thomas Hayden Church, who plays Sandman. I just feel like the drama works a lot better because they allow it to breathe and they can pull back the corniness. People do say that the first two are corny, but intentionally so, and while I can't agree with that, it takes away from the drama, because even when drama is meant to be occurring on screen, the acting is very corny, and the direction of the movie is so kind of over the top and corny that I can't take the drama seriously. For example, Doc Ock's death at the end of the second Spider-Man film is meant to be this tragic, heroic sacrifice, but while it's happening, you have Alfred Molina going, "No!" the really kind of corny screaming thing. But in this movie, whenever there's a dramatic scene, it is lent the necessary depth through the performances and the actors. I feel like they really did improve, and this film, I feel, out of all three, really does know when to pull back the corniness. Something that I figured I might as well say about this movie is that I think despite some of the effects being dated, a lot of the action scenes do hold up very well and are very creative. Sam Raimi makes good use of these villains and their different attributes. A particular moment that I like is when Harry shoots a flamethrower at Sandman at the end and smashes his arm off as it turns into glass. I think there's just a lot of creativity in the action scenes, and there's always something at stake. There's always tension involved. The main kind of first action scene of the movie is Harry versus Peter, and I like that there's always kind of a sense of tension throughout that scene because Peter's trying to keep Aunt May's ring safe, but you also have the overall kind of tension of Peter and Harry finally having gotten to this point in their friendship where they're kind of just at odds with each other. And even the scene with Gwen Stacy falling off the building, you have Spider-Man just kind of swinging or falling, jumping through all of this debris to catch her. I think that's also very cool, and just all of the action scenes, I'm probably missing some, but I think all of them are executed very well, and the effects are dated in a way that they're kind of charming and likable. Not in the way that I feel a lot of modern superhero films are dated, because, you know, we've got the MCU movies, and there are movies from that franchise that came out like a couple years ago, and the effects already look terrible. There are a lot of effects in this movie, and really the entire Sam Raimi series, that do hold up very well, particularly the effects on Sandman in his birth scene. I suppose the birth of Sandman is what it's called. That whole scene is fantastic, and the effects look incredible. They look way better than the effects used on Sandman in No Way Home or whatever. Now let's talk about the characters in this film, because some of them get quite a bit of hate, especially the villains, such as Venom. But we can't talk about Venom without talking about Eddie Brock. Topher Grace gets a lot of hate for his role in this film, but I actually feel like he does an incredible job playing the foil to Peter Parker's character and showing the person that Peter could become. They draw parallels intentionally between both of those characters. There's a scene where Eddie is taking a picture of Gwen at this celebratory event, and you see how their relationship just isn't working because Eddie's just weirdly obsessed with her and thinks that they're in love. Well, they're not really. And then you have a scene played in direct parallel to that of Peter taking a picture of MJ, and you see how strained their relationship has become, and that's showing that Peter could become the person that Eddie is now. I really love that, and I love the foil that he plays to Peter Parker, and how he's just kind of this person that doesn't have anybody in his life who's sympathetic towards him, and that results in him becoming the villain. He's the perfect person to be taken over by the power of the symbiote. And the symbiote in this film, Venom itself, I feel is far better than in the Venom movies. Because if you look at the symbiote in those movies, what is it? What does it serve a purpose for in the story? It's just a funny voice that Tom Hardy does. It doesn't serve a thematic purpose. They don't delve into any interesting philosophical themes, any moral questions. It's just this stupid voice that Tom Hardy does. But in this movie, the symbiote is an amplifier for the film's entire theme of greed and giving into your selfish impulses. It latches itself on to Peter Parker at his most vulnerable moment when he's completely given into all of his selfish impulses. And when Peter gives into those impulses, he humiliates Eddie Brock, which leads to him becoming the perfect candidate for the symbiote to latch onto. I think the symbiote works perfectly in this film as a physical representation of all of that anger, hatred, and just all of those negative emotions that we as people have stored inside of us. Next up on my list of characters to discuss is Sandman. Now, just kind of a fun fact, my dad actually met the actor Thomas Hayden Church, who plays Sandman in this film like years before it came out, and I just think that's kind of a cool piece of information because I can go around and be like, yo, my dad met Sandman. But beyond that, I feel like his character is extremely well written, and he's my favorite Spider-Man villain because he's extremely relatable and has a motivation that any of us can connect with. He wants to save his daughter from cancer because he's a man living in poverty, and he just has to go to some extreme lengths. I feel that any of us would go to try and save his child. I feel like any of us can relate to and connect with that. And he's also not really a villain. The main problem that I've seen a lot of people have with his character is they feel like it undermines Peter's actions, inadvertently leading to the death of Uncle Ben. In the first film, he lets the robber go, which leads to him shooting Uncle Ben and driving off in Uncle Ben's car. In this film, you find out that that character was simply an accomplice to Flint Marko, who is the true murderer of Uncle Ben. But it doesn't undermine that at all, because Peter's actions still led to that robber catching Flint by surprise and causing him to shoot Uncle Ben accidentally. I know some people may think that's cheap, but to me it's perfect, because Spider-Man's stories have always been about imperfect people who make mistakes, and in that scenario, Flint made a mistake. He does tell Peter at the end of the film that he spent a lot of nights wishing he could take that back, and I love how Peter does forgive him at the end, and that's able to set Flint free in a way, because that's obviously something that he's never forgiven himself for. I feel like Thomas Hayden Church plays that character extremely well, because on the outside he seems like this very hardened, gruff character with a deep voice, but on the inside he's truly just a tortured soul. Let's move on to my favorite thing about this film, Peter Parker. In my opinion, this film has the best on-screen portrayal of Peter Parker ever. Allow me to explain. From the very beginning of this film, Peter is already much more confident than he was in the previous films, and that leads to him being more arrogant. As a result, Mary Jane's actions feel much more justified, because in the previous film, she was so overly mean to Peter for no reason, because most of that film is told from Peter's perspective. In this film, we're seeing different perspectives, and you can understand why certain people don't like Peter at this point in time. He's allowing the Spider-Man persona to go to his head, and he's making some very morally questionable choices. And I feel that's far more realistic than in a lot of other Spider-Man stories where Peter Parker is written to be this almost overly nice character. This film shows that Peter Parker is still a fallible individual who can suffer from all of the other human urges and impulses that all of us suffer from. Something else I love about this movie is that Peter's actions always have consequences. The plot is at the behest of the characters. The characters are not at the behest of the plot. Peter's actions have consequences and they drive the plot. The action scene between him and Harry at the beginning of the film ends with Harry hitting his head and suffering from amnesia. Rather than telling Harry the truth about what happened between the two of them, he decides to make the selfish decision of withholding that information from Harry as to not allow it to have a bad effect on his own life. He also completely messes up his relationship with MJ by allowing the Spider-Man persona to go to his head and making her feel like she cannot open up to him anymore about the fact that she was fired from her job. He humiliates Eddie Brock in front of the Daily Bugle, which leads to him completely giving into resentment and becoming the dark foil of Peter Parker at the end of the film. Peter also makes so many immoral decisions throughout the film that lead to him hurting the people that he loves the most. He blows off half of his friend's face, he slaps his girlfriend, which thankfully snaps him out of his symbiote obsession, but I love that this film shows that Peter is not an impervious person. He can make mistakes, and I always love stories in general that show a hero just going down a dark path and having to build themselves back up. Peter digs himself into an extremely deep hole in this film, and you get to see him climb his way back out of it. And I love that. I think Tobey Maguire did this character brilliant justice in this film. Even in the emo scenes, I feel like that's completely in character for a Peter Parker who would have completely given into his negative emotions. Speaking of negative emotions, selfishness, and resentment, that's what this film is truly about at its core. It's about selfishness and selflessness and how we can build ourselves back up from our past mistakes. Aunt May tells Peter towards the end of the film that he has to forgive himself for what he's done wrong in the past. And he is able to do that finally by forgiving Flint Marko, the man who killed his uncle. In that scene, you see that he finally feels as though a weight has been lifted off his shoulders, and that in that scene is he not only forgiving Flint, but he's also forgiving himself for his past actions by telling Flint that he's done just as many immoral things as he's done. You also see Flint finally freed and at peace because he's finally been able to forgive himself as well. You also see Harry show up and assist Peter in the battle at the end, finally having forgiven him for at least being who he thinks is responsible for the death of his father and for lying to him about the truth of their troubled history together. MJ and Peter have to forgive each other at the end of the film and try to start over. And Eddie Brock, Venom, is the one character who is completely consumed by selfishness and resentment. And he gives into that and dies because he would rather give into all of his negative emotions than forgive himself and the others in his life who have wronged him. Whatever comes our way, whatever battle we have raging inside us, we always have a choice. My friend Harry taught me that. He chose to be the best of himself. It's the choices that make us who we are, and we can always choose to do what's right. Those are the words of Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker at the end of Spider-Man 3, and I feel they perfectly encapsulate not only this film and the themes present within it, but also the character of Spider-Man. This film just perfectly nails everything about the character of Spider-Man in my mind. He's a heroic person who, on the inside, is truly a good human being, but he can also make mistakes, as all of us do. And I love this film for that reason alone. I feel like the conclusion of this film is rather understated and quiet, and intentionally so. It's simply a scene of two people slow dancing together, reminiscing about all that they've gone through throughout their lives and trying to start over. And I think that's beautiful. I think this is a beautiful story. And whether or not I love all of these films, as I said, I think the first two films are rather dated. I think this film is perfect and just gets everything right about the Spider-Man character, and it has always been and always will be my favorite Spider-Man film. So you guys, please let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you have a newfound appreciation for Spider-Man 3 after this video? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care. Bye.